If one day I'm no longer here, where will I go, mister? The question came softly, almost a whisper, yet it silenced the entire hallway like someone had pressed pause on the world. Elon Musk stood in the middle of the hospital corridor, seemingly stopping just to shake hands with the doctor before moving on. And yet, with that single question from a little girl barely reaching his waist, all the plans in his head came to a halt. Elon looked down and met the girl's eyes, clear, innocent, yet quietly holding something vast. Something even scientists, philosophers, or successful people like him might not dare to face. He smiled, trying to mask the sudden unease welling up inside him. "What's your name?" he asked. "My name is Hannah." That afternoon, Elon hadn't come to the hospital for a charity event. He was simply visiting an old friend battling cancer, someone he hadn't seen in over a decade. But fate seemed to have arranged a different meeting, a conversation that wasn't scheduled, not part of any long-term plan, yet powerful enough to shift how he saw his entire life. Hannah was a pediatric leukemia patient, just 9 years old. Small-framed, her hair cut short from chemotherapy, her skin pale, but her eyes shone brighter than any fluorescent light in the ward. Elon had intended to stop for just a second, but her question held him there longer than he had anticipated. "What did you just ask?" he gently inquired, as if buying himself time to process the moment. Hannah looked up, her voice now steadier. "If one day I'm no longer here, where will I go? I mean, after we die." Elon had never feared a question like this before. Not because he didn't know the answer, but because he'd never allowed himself to ask it. To Elon Musk, life was a stream of projects, technologies, and interplanetary dreams. He was used to questions like, when will we colonize Mars? What is the future of AI? Will Tesla remain the leader? Not, what happens after we die? He exhaled softly, then sat down across from Hannah. The children's waiting room now held just the two of them. No footsteps. No doctors. Only the afternoon sun slipping through the window. "You know," Elon began, "that's a question I think every adult has thought about at some point, but not everyone has the courage to ask, like you just did." Hannah smiled faintly. Perhaps she knew she had just voiced something profound. Elon glanced at the ceiling for a moment, as if searching for a star hidden there. "I used to believe that every question in life could be answered through science. From how a rocket leaves Earth to how a car runs without fuel. But, for your question, I think there are things we can't quite measure yet." "So, no one really knows?" Hannah asked, a hint of concern in her voice. Elon nodded gently. "Maybe that's true. Some believe we go to a place called heaven. Others believe we become stardust, returning to the universe. Some think we simply cease to exist. But the important thing isn't choosing the right belief, it's finding whatever brings you peace." The little girl was quiet. Then, she softly asked, "What about you? What do you believe?" Elon paused. He, the man who had turned impossible ideas into reality. The one the world looked to as a symbol of reason, action, and innovation, now found himself in a place with no maps, guided by a 9-year-old. "I think," he said slowly, "what I believe in isn't a specific place. But that, we don't just disappear. We leave something behind. An action, a memory, an idea, a feeling. And that lives on, in others." Hannah gazed at him for a long moment. Then, in a voice both light and sincere, she said, "Then I want to leave behind a question. So someone will keep looking for the answer for me, if I don't have enough time to find it myself." Elon was stunned. Not because her response was poetic, but because he saw himself in her eyes. He had once been a child just like her, daring to ask, to dream, to think the unthinkable. Somewhere along the way, he had lost that, in the rush for time and productivity. The conversation lasted just over 20 minutes, but as Elon left the hospital and walked under the deep crimson sunset, he felt like he had just stepped out of an interview with his own soul. He didn't tell anyone about the encounter. No social media post. No mention in a speech. But that night, he sat for a long time on his balcony, gazing up at the star-filled sky, a place he had always seen as humanity's future destination. And for the first time in many years, he didn't think about Mars. He thought about wherever it is that Hannah had asked about. Is it true, he wondered, that when we die, we become stardust? Or is it all just a nameless silence? No one really knows. But the question remains. And for Elon, a new journey had just begun, not to search for a new planet, but to rediscover what it truly means to be human. A week after his meeting with little Hannah, Elon Musk still couldn't shake the image of her clear, unwavering eyes. It didn't haunt him with pain or sorrow. It lingered like an unfinished melody, a tune waiting for its next verse. On his cluttered desk, surrounded by strategic documents and financial reports, lay a simple sticky note. No one at the company knew what it meant, except for Elon himself. He had scribbled it hastily in blue ink, right after meeting Hannah. Where do we go when we're no longer here? It wasn't a new question in the world. Philosophers had wrestled with it for thousands of years. Religions, scientists, poets, all had touched it in some form. But for Elon, the question felt both distant and intimately close, like breath. Strangely enough, it hadn't come from a tenured professor or a sage. It had come from a girl not yet 10. And Elon, the man who had stood on TED stages, who had spoken to millions about humanity's future, found himself unable to give a clear answer to a child. That evening, instead of reviewing performance reports for Starlink, Elon went to his private library. A quiet room where he kept his oldest books, some from his student days. A few on philosophy, many on science fiction, and several he had read as a boy obsessed with space in South Africa. He ran his hand along the spines, as if tracing old memories. Suddenly, he stopped at a thin, pale gray book, its cover yellowed with time, The Prophet by Khalil Gibran. He opened it at random and landed on a page. There, he read. You would know the secret of death. But how shall you find it unless you seek it in the heart of life? Elon froze. The line struck him like a tap on the forehead. Before you ask about death, have you truly lived? The next morning, he texted Larry, a close friend and renowned contemporary philosophy professor. The message was simple. Got time for coffee? I have a big question. 2 days later, they sat by the window of a small cafe in Palo Alto, where few recognized that Elon Musk had just paused his empire to search for an answer to a question without data. First time I've seen you show up without charts, Larry chuckled. Elon sipped his espresso, then replied honestly, do you believe there's something after death? Larry raised an eyebrow but didn't respond right away. After a few quiet seconds, he said, that's a big one. But I don't think you're here just to talk philosophy. What happened? Elon recounted the entire meeting with Hannah, every look, every word, every silence. Larry listened intently, not interrupting once. When Elon finished, his friend simply nodded, as if everything made sense now. You're not really looking for an answer to what death is, Elon, Larry said. You're trying to understand what life is. That sentence echoed in Elon's mind the entire day. And like a chain reaction, it sparked a series of quiet journeys, meeting, listening, writing, and reflecting. The following week, he invited to Tesla headquarters a physicist who had written about consciousness after death from a quantum perspective. Then came a Tibetan monk, once a software engineer who had given up his career to pursue monastic life. Next, a young priest, a palliative care doctor, and an elderly woman who had experienced a near-death encounter. Elon didn't argue. He didn't debate, as he often would. He simply asked, the way Hannah had asked him. What helps people fear death less? Why do some believe, and others don't? Is there a point where science and faith meet? One day, Elon stood in the middle of a SpaceX assembly floor, watching rockets being constructed. The machines roared, workers bustled, but his mind was elsewhere. Suddenly, he felt something strange. Though surrounded by the peak of human technology, he felt incredibly small. He thought of the universe, the place he once dreamed of taking humanity to, as a means of preserving its existence. But now, he wondered, Could it be that inside every human being is another kind of universe, one that no rocket could ever reach? One evening, while walking alone by Lake Tahoe, Elon paused to watch the sunset. The sun was setting, but not in haste. Everything moved slowly, warmly, as if inviting the observer to live fully in that moment. He remembered Hannah's eyes. She hadn't asked that question to be answered. She had asked it to pass on a journey. And he, a man who had everything, now felt grateful to a little girl who had given him something he never thought he needed, a question that couldn't be answered, but could guide him. At the end of that second part of his journey, Elon wrote, not a formula, not an investment plan, but a single line on paper. There may be no final answer. But the act of asking, seeking, and continuing to live is the most meaningful journey of all. 2 months had passed since Elon first met Hannah at the hospital. Everything in his world seemed to continue as normal. SpaceX tested another prototype, Tesla prepared to launch a new Model X version, and Neuralink made progress in brain-computer interfaces. Everything was still moving forward. But inside Elon, a different kind of movement was taking place, slower, deeper, and strangely, immeasurable by data or KPIs. He began spending more time thinking, not about numbers or technology, but about things people usually avoid: death, meaning, belief, and existence. He grew quieter in meetings. Some colleagues noticed the change. But no one asked, because Elon was still Elon, decisive, sharp, and no one wanted to be the first to step into the expanding silence inside his mind. One evening, while sorting through old items in his garage, Elon came across a model rocket he had built with his sons. The label on the model was faded, but the words remained clear. The future is the place we don't yet know, but still dare to go. He sank to the floor, gently brushing the paper. That line, once meant for science, now felt just as true for faith. One early winter morning, Elon received a call from the hospital. But it wasn't from a doctor. It was from Hannah. Her voice was still soft, but there was a hint of excitement. "Mr. Elon, do you still remember me?" Elon laughed, a genuine laugh he hadn't had in a long time. "Of course I do. How could I forget the person who kept me awake for 2 whole months?" Hannah giggled. But then her tone shifted. "I'm going home for a few days. The doctor said it's okay. I was wondering, could you come visit me?" That afternoon, Elon arrived in a small seaside town, where Hannah and her mother lived in a modest house with a garden in the back. The home wasn't modern, but it was warm. As he stepped inside, Elon felt like he had been pulled out of a world of metal, screens, and technology, and placed into the real world. Hannah sat in a cozy armchair, covered with a thin blanket. She looked paler than before, but her eyes were the same, clear and full of light. "Do you have another question for me?" Elon teased gently. Hannah shook her head. "No more questions. Today. I want to give you a gift." Elon raised an eyebrow. "You're giving me a gift?" She nodded firmly, then opened a small drawer beside her and pulled out a stack of papers. "This is my book of unanswered questions. I write in it every time I think of something no one seems to have an answer for. And now, I want you to have it, to keep looking for me." Elon fell silent. He took the notebook. The first page was handwritten in shaky, childlike letters. "If I'm no longer here, where will I go?" He remembered that moment vividly. And now, the question wasn't just a beginning, it had become a torch being passed on. "I'm not sure I'll have enough time to find all the answers," Hannah whispered. "But I believe, if there's anyone who can go far and maybe discover something, it's you." Elon didn't know what to say. His throat tightened. He, the man who had debated the world's brightest minds, now sat in silence before a little girl, as if she were the guide for the rest of his life. "I'll keep this notebook," he finally said. "And I promise, I'll never stop searching." Before leaving the town, Elon stood alone on the beach. Waves lapped gently. The cold breeze slipped beneath his collar. He opened the notebook again. The questions inside weren't complex. But no one had ever truly answered them. Why are some people born sick while others are healthy? Is anyone out there listening to our prayers? Does love disappear when someone is gone? If humans reach Mars, will they find peace there? Elon read each line slowly, feeling like he was entering a labyrinth, not one that led to an exit, but to deeper and deeper questions. 2 weeks later, Elon returned to the hospital. This time, it wasn't to visit anyone in particular. It was just to sit for a while in the small garden where he and Hannah had first talked. In his hands was a letter, written for her. He didn't know if Hannah would still be strong enough to read it. But he wrote it anyway. Dear Hannah, thank you for asking a question I never had the courage to face. Thank you for reminding me that life isn't just about conquering what lies outside, but about exploring the world within. I don't know when I'll find the answer. Maybe I never will. But I promise I'll keep asking, with all my heart. And if, someday, I happen to find even the tiniest light in the middle of that deep, dark night, I'll remember that you were the one who lit the way. As Elon left the hospital, he didn't look back. But in his heart, she remained, like a small star that never dimmed. And in the pocket of his coat, the little notebook was still there, not as a responsibility, but as an extension of his own heart. One spring morning, Elon Musk stood on the top floor of SpaceX's new headquarters in Texas. Below him, the launch pad stretched out like pathways between Earth and sky. Down there, hundreds of engineers prepared for the next big launch, a critical step in humanity's journey to Mars. But Elon's mind was elsewhere. Somewhere quieter. Somewhere deeper. Somewhere far beyond engines and orbit trajectories. Lately, Elon had become more contemplative. Not because of pressure that he had learned to handle, but because something inside him had changed. Since receiving Hannah's notebook of unanswered questions, he began to react differently to the world. Meetings that once felt important suddenly felt shallow, if they lacked genuine emotion. Long-term plans seemed incomplete without the question, why are we really doing this? Elon began asking questions outside of blueprints. Not, when will the product launch? But, if this product changes the world, how will people feel in that world? That evening, he attended a small seminar, not on technology, but on humanity in the digital age. One of the speakers was a young theologian who had once left seminary to teach philosophy to children in rural areas. During his talk, he said something Elon would never forget. We can build a world that's smarter, faster, and more powerful. But if we don't teach people how to listen to one another, how to stay silent when needed, how to ache when someone else hurts, then are we moving forward? Or are we just getting lost? Elon sat still. That sentence pierced through him like an arrow. Not because it was wrong, but because it was too right, so right, he knew he needed to re-examine everything he had once believed without question. That night, Elon sat alone in his office. Outside, the glow of circuit boards reflected off the windows. Inside, Hannah's little notebook lay quietly on his desk. He opened to the final page. No question had been written there yet. Just a blank space. This time, he picked up his fountain pen and carefully wrote, "Is a person's greatest legacy in what they create, or in how they make others feel?" The next morning, Elon made an unusual announcement to his executive team. He would step away from his work schedule for 2 weeks. No phone. No email. No meetings. No one knew exactly why. But no one dared object. Because every time Elon had disappeared before, he'd come back with a wild idea and a breakthrough that shifted entire industries. Only this time, he wasn't disappearing to invent a new technology. He was disappearing to reconnect with a part of himself he hadn't visited in years. Elon began a journey with no destination. No private jet. No assistance. No one knew where he was headed. He chose small towns. Quiet villages. Places where people lived close to nature, to each other, and to themselves. He met people who didn't know who he was. An old carpenter living deep in the forest. A couple who raised bees. a woman selling old books by the lakeside. And he realized, real life doesn't run on models. It runs on feelings. People won't remember what you built. They'll remember how they felt when you were around. One evening by a campfire, Elon listened to a man share how he had lost his son in an accident. No drama. No tears. Just tiny stories, the boy's laughter before school, his eyes when playing piano, the way he always forgot to turn off the lights at night. Elon didn't say a word. He just listened. And for the first time in a long, long while, a tear rolled down his cheek, not out of pain, but out of empathy. When he returned to the city, Elon wasn't the same man. He was still Elon, still sharp, driven, visionary. But something in his eyes had softened. It was as if behind the stars he once wanted to conquer, there was now something even more powerful. Humanity. 1 week later, Elon received a quiet message. Hannah was no longer strong enough to get out of bed. Elon froze as he read it. There weren't many words. Just, if you want to say something to her, it should be now. That day, he walked out of an important meeting without offering any explanation. He got in his car and drove to the hospital. Room 12 didn't look much different from the first time he visited. But Hannah did. She was thinner, weaker, but her eyes still shining like the very first time. You came, Elon whispered. I knew you would. I waited for you. They didn't talk much. They didn't need to. The space between them was no longer one between a tech visionary and a sick child. It was one of companionship. Two human beings, on opposite ends of the same question. Before he left, Elon leaned in, gently holding Hannah's hand. You once asked me, if I'm no longer here, where will I go? Now, I still don't know the answer. But I believe that place must be beautiful. Because a part of you is staying here, as light. Hannah smiled. Then take that light with you. Even to places I never imagined. I promise. That night, Elon didn't sleep. He stood alone on his balcony, looking up at the night sky, a sky he once saw only as a technical challenge. But now, he saw it as something else. Connection. Connection between people. Between a question and its asker. Between the journey and its destination. 3 weeks after Elon last saw Hannah, he received a quiet phone call. No one needed to say much. He already knew. Hannah was gone. Elon didn't attend the funeral. Not because he didn't care, but because he knew some goodbyes aren't meant to be witnessed with eyes. They're meant to be felt with the heart. He chose his own way of honoring her. He climbed the hill behind SpaceX headquarters, the highest point in the area, where the sky felt the closest. At the moment when the sun began to dip below the horizon, he sat down alone, notebook in hand. That same worn notebook Hannah had given him. It had never left his side. He turned to the very last page. And this time, instead of writing another question, he wrote a message. Your question took me farther than any rocket I've ever launched. It didn't send me into outer space, it sent me inward. And now I understand, some things don't need answers. They just need us to keep asking, and to live truthfully with the asking. In all the years Elon had spent building, innovating, and pushing humanity forward, he had reached places most could only dream of. But none of that, he realized, had ever felt like a complete life until he began asking the kinds of questions that didn't fit into boardrooms or launch schedules. Questions that could only be answered by living. After Hannah's passing, Elon founded a small foundation in her name. The Spark Project. Not to fund research, but to offer scholarships to children diagnosed with serious illnesses, children who still dared to dream. There was only one requirement. Applicants didn't need high grades or achievements. They simply had to submit one question they carried in their hearts. The more unanswerable, the more it deserved to be nurtured. On the day the foundation was launched, Elon didn't give a long speech. He stood on a small stage, notebook in hand, and simply said, "A little girl once asked me, if I'm no longer here, where will I go?" I didn't have the answer. But that question took me to a place I had never been. Into my own heart. From that day on, Elon was no longer quite the same. No one said he had changed. But everyone who met him could feel something different. Softer. More human. More present. He still worked. Still led. Still invented. But now, before every decision, he always asked, "What will this make people feel?" And that, he knew, was Hannah's true legacy. Not a final answer, but the ability to awaken in others. The courage to begin their own search. One night, Elon sat by his window, looking up at the stars, stars he once longed to conquer through science. Now, he looked at them differently. Not to measure them, but to connect with them. And in that quiet moment, he thought, maybe, somewhere out there, Hannah is watching too, and smiling. No one could say for sure. But Elon no longer needed certainty. Because now, he knew. Sometimes, the most important things in life don't need proof. They just need to be felt.